Well, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The First 100 Days of the Second Trump Administration. I'm Ron Jacobs, a partner in the Washington office here at Venable. This is part of our Transition Outlook webinar series, where we've been discussing key regulatory and policy changes to watch for in the second Trump administration and the 119th Congress. I'm joined by two wonderful colleagues today, Senator Dean Heller and Marco Silvester. I'll introduce them a little bit more in just a second. If we have any members of the press here today, this discussion is an off-the-record conversation. So if you have any PR needs, please email pr@venable.com for any assistance with that, but it is an off-the-record conversation. For all of those who are seeking CLE credit, continuing legal education credit, there will be a code word that we will give you sort of midway through and at the end that you will need in order to claim the credit for this. And we'll have some materials that we'll distribute to make this a CLE function today as well. So we have a lot to cover on this 100 Days webinar. Now, we're a little bit early, about maybe 2 weeks. I think April 30th is technically the full 100 days. So there may be a whole host of things that change in the next 14 days or so. You just never know. But this is our attempt to give you a little overview of what we've seen so far, what to expect, and where to go from here. So we'll talk a little bit about the hot topic, tariffs and trade, taxes, border, and other legislation issues that have to pass. There's a lot of moving parts in terms of the White House in where it's going, Congress, what it has to do, how the two mesh, and how the courts have been reacting to all of this as well. We'll talk a little bit about sort of the deregulatory framework that the administration has put into place and some of the things that we'll see happening going forward, along with the executive orders to implement that, and of course the Doge and how it is cutting government spending, the government workforce shrinking, things like that. We are excited to be able to hear sort of what Congress is thinking about all of this and how they'll play an important role as well, and then sort of where all this lands with various the court challenges to some of these actions. So today we are going to really focus on sort of having a fireside chat kind of conversation here with Senator Heller and Marco Silvester. So Senator Heller is a former U.S. Senator from Nevada and a 3-term representative. He brings many years of legislative experiences on both sides of the Capitol building, where he served on a number of important committees like the House Ways and Means and Senate Finance, Banking, Commerce, Veterans Affairs. So he has a great insight and deep understanding of the legislative process, trade, economic policy. And one of the great things with Senator Heller is that he earned a reputation for working across the aisle, building relationships wherever he went, and really helps his clients to provide good, solid counsel and understanding how things actually work and what can and can't get done. Marco is a senior policy advisor at Venable. He specializes in helping his clients navigate complex policy and regulatory challenges, especially when it comes to emergent technology and transportation, like autonomous and connected vehicles. His background includes service in both the legislative and the executive branches, having served in the Department of Transportation during the first Trump administration. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with my two colleagues today to really talk about sort of where we are, what we can expect, and what to see. So, Senator, let me start with you. You've been poking around town, talking to a lot of people in a lot of different places. What's your key sort of takeaway in the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2? What are we seeing that's different? It feels a little different to me, maybe a little more frenetic, but what are some of the key differences that you're experiencing?
Well, first of all, Ron, thank you very much for having me on board here. I want to welcome everybody to this seminar, and it's a pleasure sharing this time also with Marco. It's quite the topic when you start talking about the first 100 days and, the difference between the first 100 days in the first term versus the first 100 days of the second term. And I think, frankly, there are a lot of differences. I get an opportunity to talk to two members and how the dialogue is going with the White House, what's different this time than last time. And the differences are pretty stark. I will tell you my experiences in his first term was that he listened to everybody, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but perhaps in some ways it can be. He had dialogue. You could get into the White House. You could have the conversations. You could meet with his staff. Very, very open, very, very open. And I think he wanted to be that way. I think in this second cycle, I think he learned a lot of lessons from his first term. And I will tell you that circle has shrank dramatically. Very, very difficult. He listens to very few people, and the decisions that are being made are made from the top. And he has his advisors that he listens to very, very closely, making it difficult for members of Congress, both on the House and the Senate, unless you're in leadership, to have an opportunity to have real dialogue with this president. So I think that really is the big difference. In the first term, I'd have lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever with members of the White House, and they're pretty jovial. And some of the comments that they made about their boss, I kind of scratched my head on a little bit, but it was just really, really open dialogue. Now this circle is quite small, and making it more difficult and making it more important, I guess I should say, for people like ourselves in this position to try to be able to have the conversations, to have the relationships, to understand what's going on out there enough that when it's time, and it will be time here soon, we get past this first 100 days, but it will be time for those that you hire to do work for you on the Hill to earn their money. So that's going to happen. I just think the difference is the size of that inner circle right now.
Marco, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one major difference, and I completely echo everything that Senator Heller had to say as well. But these differences were also present during the transition period. I would draw a stark contrast between the transition period in the first term and the second term, where it was, basically unexpected that they actually prevailed in the first term in the election. That was not the case this time, and it resulted in a much better prepared White House staff with ready to go executive orders, ready to go policy documents, even implementation documents at the agency level, as well as kind of the plans for the funding freeze that everyone's aware of. So that's one additional contrast I would draw, but the source of that goes right back to what Senator Heller said. It's those same people in the inner circle who are directing that. I would even draw a distinction between how much autonomy the cabinet secretaries have this go around versus last go around. As Ron mentioned, I served at DOT in a political appointee capacity during the first term. And I'll tell you that the White House was much less hands-on than they are now with the cabinet secretaries. And I think that also goes to speak to some of those picks for the cabinet and their relationship with the president. And how that has kind of flowed down policy-wise from the White House to the agencies, rather than the agencies being fairly autonomous in their operation.
Senator, it seems like, and maybe this is just sort of the virtue of the first 100 days, but all of the energy seems to be on Pennsylvania Avenue at the White House. And for having a Congress that is Republican in both houses, it's kind of quiet over on that end. What do you make of that? How long do you think that lasts? How does that play out as we go forward?
Well, your guess and to the audience, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, we all know what the questions are. The problem is it's hard to find all the answers. One of the things I should have said also in the first question that you asked me is that the people that are around him are far more loyal. I find that they're far more loyal this time than his first term. And that does make a lot of difference. And I think that's why you're seeing them make some of the actions and movement that they are making. But as far as the Hill's concerned, you're right. It's a little quieter. I'm kind of surprised it's as quiet as it is. Any other president, there would be a lot of machinations and a lot of yelling and screaming going on. And boy, it has been quiet. I think as far as that concerns, Republicans are kind of cautiously sitting back, trying to figure out where they're going. I will tell you in my conversations, especially with leadership, is that they're frankly saying that, hard is hard. And it always has been hard. But what they're finding is because of the numbers that we have out there, that even the easy stuff is getting hard. And very hard for that matter. And so they're going to even to some of their constituents, government agencies that from their states, other corporate entities that perhaps are getting federal funding, and they're asking what's going to happen. And they're saying, hey, we really don't know. And frankly, they're telling their constituents, don't expect it. If you're getting federal funds right now and you do receive them, consider yourself lucky. I mean, that's quite the message that you're sending to your own states. That if you're a college, if you're a state, if you're a local government, and you're wondering if your federal funds are coming in, and your representatives are saying, hold on tight because it may or may not happen. If you're getting it, congratulations. If you're not, probably don't expect it. So that's the kind of noise that's going on out there that you're hearing, under the radar, and the problems that conversations that I'm having is they're trying to figure out how to break through. How if you're an entity out there right now and you have a problem, an issue, how do you get your issue in front of policymakers? And it's very, very difficult right now. There's not a lot of oxygen in the room, and everybody knows that. There's not a lot of oxygen out there in the room unless you say something negative about the president. Of course, then the press will run with it, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. But I will tell you, because of what's going on with all these executive orders, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's been over 110 executive orders in these first 85 days. And who knows what's going to happen, as you said, Ron, in the next 2 weeks before we get out of the 100 days. But there is, they're cautiously watching what's going on and when the next move is.
Marco, what do you make of Senator Heller's point about the money in particular, the funds being cut off, and sort of act first, think later, appearance from the outside? How do people navigate that? How do they figure this out if they've got plans based on a research grant, a contract? How do they think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can give an example from the DOT side where a ton of grants are issued, and that's where my experience is. So at the end of the Biden administration, there were 3,200 grants without executed grant agreements, so contracts between the federal government and the grant recipient. And so really priority number one for the agency has been to go back through all of those things, make sure that they comport with administration priorities, and get those grant agreements executed. As of Secretary Duffy's hearing at the EPW committee, I believe last week, they were at around 260 grant agreements executed. So that's less than 10% of the total that they need to get through. The priority, from the DOT side is to go through those, but some of these are, very long grant agreements especially for the large grants. So states are still waiting on that money. I would say if you know that your grant agreement does align with administration priorities, so that would be something that does not include things related to electrification or bike lanes in the DOT context, then I would say you need to go through the state government, talk to the government affairs office at DOT. So that's just one example. I would assume at other agencies it works similarly. But they're just going through that piece by piece. They're fairly thinly staffed still, so it's just going to take a while. And this is something that the administration is willing to take a hit on politically, and just try to get states to exercise patience while assuring them that the money is going to come. I think there's going to be a ramp up of this, but so far it has been slow. And they've definitely been hearing from their state constituents. Members of Congress have been hearing from them. I would think as we get longer into this, you will hear more public comments, especially from Senate appropriators and others that are in charge of allocating those funds, as far as that these grant agreements need to be executed as soon as possible. So that's the current status as far as I'm aware of. It may differ agency to agency, but from the DOT side, they have a big backlog to work through.
Hey, Ron, Marco says something that I think was good perspective, and that's what is going on back home. I mean, we had as you probably read in the news, there are town hall meetings now without the legislators even present. And, it's just not a small town hall meeting, and most of them are tele-town hall styles. But you're talking about 2,000 to 2,500 people that are showing up. And if you do show up in person, ask Chuck Grassley. He'll tell you how tough some of these town hall meetings can be right now. So there's everybody has an eye towards the White House, but also they're keeping an ear to their states to determine exactly how all this is playing. And like I said, we're only 85 days into this, and now you have town hall meetings with 2,500 people, or AOC shows up in Salt Lake City, and 20,000 people show up. I mean, there's messages in all that. And so I think everybody at this point is trying to figure out how this is going to play out. And frankly, what the politics is as of today.
One of the things I've noticed are some ads that appear to be run by sort of pro-Trump 501c4 organizations, support the president, do this. That feels like something that he certainly didn't have last time, that gets back maybe to Marco, your point, that they were a little more shovel ready, so to speak, for the Trump 2 and sort of to build that political support. Is that a sense that you have?
Yeah, so I would say yes, and it's also kind of the Elon factor. So Elon, I think no secret, has been funding the America PAC and other organizations that are trying to kind of build that grassroots support with an eye toward special elections and the midterms. We'll see how successful that effort is, but there's definitely more of a political arm to this White House through some of those independent organizations than there were last time. And I wouldn't expect them to be as flat-footed going into the midterm cycle as they were during the first term. One thing to note, and this is an overarching point when you think about crowds of people showing up to town halls, the midterm electorate now skews much more Democratic because the Republican electorate, especially in presidential years, relies on what's called a low propensity voter. So these highly politically engaged people that show up to town halls and otherwise, and that tend to vote more frequently in midterms, tend to actually lean more Democratic, which is really a departure from 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And that's just something to note. And I think a lot of this independent organization expenditure is to try to kind of corral some of those voters to actually get out and vote in the midterm. So that's definitely a difference from last time.
Hey, Ron, can I take a stab at this question that you just asked? And by the way, Marco is correct. I'm not sure how expansive these town hall meetings are. I mean, is the left expanding it beyond what it was, 6 months ago? Electors that they lost, or perhaps Democrats that vote Republican. At this point, it's hard to tell. But I want to talk a little bit about what you were talking about with some of these ads that are on TV. I just saw one. You talk about taking it to the next level. I saw an ad, I think it was either last night or this morning, and it was a Ford ad. And Ford ran an ad that I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. And they were talking about how many cars they make in America, and that it's American built for Americans. Imagine that tagline talking about a large corporation, if not one of the largest in America, talking about where they build their cars, how much money their employees make, and they build them for Americans. And this is the influence of this White House right now. It's not just having on government, not just having on legislators, but on corporate America also, to see an ad that is that specific, that direct. Let's be very clear. It is changing. It is changing the skyline right now, not just how legislation and how the White House runs, but boy, it is changing the landscape for corporate America also.
Let's talk a little bit about the corporate America piece for a second, if you don't mind. And one of the things we've seen is a lot of different positions on tariffs in the past couple of weeks. Not getting into the specifics of sort of rates and where they are set and everything like that, but we obviously saw some effect on the stock market and the bond market and everything else. How do you see sort of corporate America dealing with the economic impact of some of the trade policies in particular? Obviously, Ford's touting its Made in America piece, but it gets a lot more complicated when we need to exempt car parts from the tariffs to make us build the cars here. And it seems like there's a little bit of uncertainty there. And I guess it's a two-part question. One is sort of businesses navigating it. And related to that, we've heard different advisors to the president explain the same tariffs differently in terms of outcome and purpose. And sort of, I think maybe that gets back to your initial point about sort of the circle and who's making the decisions, but we'd love to get your insight onto a little bit of who's making the decision about tariffs, what's the intent, and how do we navigate that for our clients?
Well, first of all, I was speaking to a group last week, Ron, and the discussion was obviously this very question and the chaos and, trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow versus, what happened last week. Here's the problem is that we have I don't think there's a Republican legislator in Washington, D.C. that isn't probably on record somewhere saying that tariffs are tax increases. Every Republican, and that was the theme for decades. And yet here they are supporting and voting in support of the president and the White House with this agenda. Take the other side. And that is, I don't know if there's a Democrat out there over the last couple of decades that has been serving that at one point or another has said that tariffs are good. And that it's good for manufacturing, and it's good for jobs, and it's good for the middle class. They've all been saying that for decades, and yet here they are voting against the White House and the tariffs and the agenda that's in front of them. That is part of this chaos that has brought this to a new level. Is that they don't know where their legislators, let alone let alone the process of trying to manage this. It just swings back and forth and back and forth, and I think that's even making it more difficult. It's not easy because this is changing daily. What are we? 10% across the board. Yet it was 2 weeks ago at 50 to 75%. So again, this is a very small circle. Navarro, those that he is listening to the closest are the ones that are helping him navigate through this process. Obviously, you now have Elon on the other side, and he's pushing back, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you ought to have both discussions going on in the White House at the same time, but at what expense? And I think that's what you're asking me, Ron, is how does corporate America deal with the fact that you have this kind of back and forth going on in the White House and you're seeing results from it, and that is a slingshot of just one way or the other on what all this means. You saw the impact on iPhones and all that, who got into his ear. It's probably most of us can figure out who did that, but is it? How close is this, or how much influence can you have on this process? And I think that is the question, and I think that's the hardest question for the industries, and frankly for Washington D.C. today.
Thank you, Marco. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that point?
Sure. Just briefly, I think from what I've seen, the approach of corporate America is to try to weather the storm and hope we come out on the other side, with bilateral trade deals with countries of high priority. And then I think, it seems to be, and I'm not sure if this is just the message of the week from the White House, that the strategy, if there is an overarching strategy, is to try to isolate China. Obviously, that goes against the initial approach, which was broad-based tariffs on a lot of countries. But to the senator's point, really, there's three schools of thought here. The Elon is a more traditional Republican, kind of Milton Friedman-esque low tariffs across the board philosophy. Then you have kind of the Scott Bessent attitude, the Treasury Secretary, who has really been pushing the White House to give an end goal or kind of preview the end game for companies and for the public, which is, we're doing this in order to get deals. And then there's kind of the Navarro, Steve Bannonite, and to a certain extent, Robert Lighthizer approach, which was, no, tariffs across the board are good and revitalize American manufacturing, and we should have, some substantial tariffs long term, and really not as an end game, but as a consistent policy. So they're, continuing to battle it out. I think the battle is really between the Navarro school of thought and the Besant school of thought. But I think anyone's guess is as good as mine at this point.
Hey, Ron, part of the frustration that you're seeing on Capitol Hill right now is I think that most lawmakers on both sides did believe changes were necessary in the way we had our trade deals with most of these countries. They thought that there ought to be some way to make these adjustments, but everybody thought it was going to be done with a scalpel. I don't think anybody expected this to be done with a chainsaw, and that is what's causing some of this consternation as it goes back and forth. And it's not because they necessarily disagree with the policy and what he's trying to do. It's just the process. And that, I think, is what Marco's trying to say. People are just kind of sitting back and let's see where this goes. And in my circles and the people that I'm talking to, most believe this is a 60 to 90-day process and that we will see this all come back together. And I hope they're right. But if you take his base, if you take the MAGA base right now, they're thrilled. They're 100% thrilled with the way this is going, and he's playing to that group. The next group, of course, is the lawmakers on the Hill that he has to keep happy. And how does he do that as this pendulum swings back and forth on a weekly, sometimes daily basis throughout this process? But again, I think that most people thought there needed to be a change. Some changes need to occur, but it was going to be a little bit, the process was going to be a little bit more careful. They did not anticipate a sledgehammer to the process.
And so is your sense that some of the reaction that we're seeing in financially and otherwise is the haphazard nature of this as opposed to the fact that there are some tariffs somewhere to begin with? Is that kind of your gut on this?
Yeah, it's the process. I think the process is the problem right now. I don't think that the policy, I think most people agree with the policy that something needed to be done. I think it's the process that has caused the consternation, and they're trying to deal with the process.
So on that process, Marco, we've mentioned a particular person's name a couple of times. He's very much associated with the Doge and the cutting of government spending and the agencies. There's a sense there, I think, too, that process is one of chainsaw, sledgehammer, small nuclear weapon, as opposed to a scalpel. What are you hearing? Where does the Doge go after the first 100 days? What does that look like, and how's it being implemented now that we get out of the gates?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I would say there is really kind of a hub or a mothership based out of the White House. Those are some of the core staff. Folks might have seen an interview with a number of the Doge people. Those kind of all belong to that core team. Then kind of fanned out across the agencies, there is a Doge lead. And then some of the agencies have a couple of additional staff members on that team. What they're focused on is, of course, the government reform side of things. It can range anywhere from getting rid of the landlines, which cost a certain amount on the desks of the political appointees and kind of across the board of the career officials, to going, line item by line item with grants, and stopping payment on certain grants that kind of flag suspicion. So where does it go after the first 100 days? I think is definitely an open question. I think it's becoming more institutionalized now than it was at the beginning. And so I would expect a permanent presence of the staff, at least at the agencies. I'm not sure, of course, what the lead Doge person's future holds for the next 100 days after these. But I do expect that work to continue at the agency level. It does have support from top advisors at the White House. And I think the relationship with the cabinet secretaries has improved over the last few weeks.
Senator, a lot of this is cutting spending that Congress has appropriated. How to reconcile that? How does this play out in terms of Does the next spending bill reflect the smaller numbers? Does it get appropriated again and then held back? What are we looking at here?
Well, first of all, the first 100 days has been all about Doge, immigration, and tariffs. That has been the discussion for the first 100 days. At some point, they're gonna have to start paying attention to reconciliation. My conversations and this um, this plays right into the question that you asked me. At some point, Congress needs to make some decisions. And I will tell you right now, their leadership is concerned about reconciliation. The taxes, the energy, and of course, the immigration also, that'll all be part of it. I'm sure healthcare will be added, and there'll be extenders, so on and so forth. But the three main taxes, immigration, and the other issues that we're talking about here, they need to start and energy. They need to really start focusing on that. I've told leadership that the mistake that we made in 2017 was we waited too late, especially on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We waited too late, and you didn't see it the work play out until after the next election. And of course, at that point, Trump lost the majority in Congress. And so they need to do this as early as possible. They need to start focusing on this. And at some point, Trump is going to have to focus from what Doge is doing. And by the way, I believe all this comes to a screeching halt the day that Elon Musk leaves the administration. There will be, obviously the secretaries will continue to push their reforms, but this is all at the lead of Elon Musk. So there's conversations, and I'm not privy to the depth of those conversations of how long Elon Musk is going to be with this administration. But I do think you see tremendous differences and changes once Elon Musk leaves this administration. But I'm just saying, at some point they got to pivot. They got to get to reconciliation, because if they wait and wait and wait, I don't think that it's in the best interest of those up in the next election cycle for this to go past, say the August recess.
Marco, so for the uninitiated, can you give us the high-level overview of reconciliation, what it means, why we have to have it, and sort of what's going to, the broad outlines of what the senator mentioned would be in there?
Absolutely. So the reconciliation process is a process by which you can change budget impact items with a simple majority. So this will be, changing funding levels in addition to changing tax provisions. The senator probably knows about the Byrd Rule better than I do, but it's also a process by which there are certain exclusions to policy changes that cannot happen in this process, and allows it to move forward with a simple majority. What's going to be in it? As the senator mentioned, the three big pillars are tax, focusing on extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the 2017 tax cut law that the president spearheaded in the first term, for another 10 years. The second piece is immigration, so additional funding for border security operations, finishing the wall, among other things, but just additional funding for deportations and border enforcement. And the last piece, energy, largely going to consist of adjustments or repeal to the 2021 Inflation Reduction Act law that President Biden spearheaded. Although there is a lot of lobbying from industry that are currently benefiting from those credits, particularly on the automotive and trucking side, that there has been some pushback from members of Congress, Republicans on both sides of the Capitol, on some of those repeals. So those are key things to look out for. They're also probably going to expand oil leases, among other things, to kind of juice production of fossil fuels. They're also going to have some key campaign promise fulfillments in there for President Trump. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, And I believe what's been floated is a 15% corporate rate for companies that manufacture products in America. But a lot of open discussion there. As the senator mentioned, it's not quite there yet on the Hill. I've heard markups for the reconciliation bill as early as April 30th on the House side. But as the senator mentioned, the speaker is going to need his chief vote whipper who sits in the Oval Office and keep that kind of factional Republican Party, especially in the House, together on this bill.
I'm going to come back to you, Senator, on that point in just a second, but I want to, for all of those who are going to get continuing legal education for today, the code word is first 100 days 2025. So that's the word first, the number 100, the word days, and then 2025, all one word, first 100 days 2025 to get the CLE. Senator, turning to that sort of the chief whip on Pennsylvania Avenue, it's an interesting. I think when you look back in history, you think about Lyndon Johnson sort of whipping the Congress, having people into the White House, President Reagan doing the same thing, Tip O'Neill there for drinks. Where does President Trump fit into this? How does he do this? How does he get the whip count up to get this process moving?
Well, let's not make any doubt about this fact, and that is that the Republican Party is controlled by Donald Trump today. And frankly, if you ask me, I think he's going to control the Republican Party for the next 10 years. And his threats and his determination, and not that he has as big of impact in the general election, but he certainly can control a primary. And so that fear is always in the back of the head of those that are elected and on the Hill at this point. But go ahead.
What I say, I think that's obviously the big piece, but part of it, I'm curious. Well, I don't care if it's one bill or two bills when we talk about reconciliation. It seems like at some point he's the one who does control this and has to sort of lay out the legislative construct. How does that play out?
Well, keep in mind one thing, and that is that this reconciliation bill will be passed by Republicans and only by Republicans. Unlike the other presidents that you mentioned, they had Republicans and Democrats. And the reason you have to ask yourself is why the partisanship at this level? And of course, there's a couple of reasons. One is a lack of trust between one side of the aisle and the other. And frankly, one side of the aisle in the White House. And the second one is that the numbers are so close. Numbers are so close, it makes it very, very difficult for the minority to come over to the majority and support their agenda without taking a tremendous amount of heat. But I think this president is in control of this agenda. When he says it's time to go, it's go time, and that's the way the process is working at this point. And I don't anticipate that it changes anytime soon.
So you mentioned that last time that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was late in 2017, a little late for the midterms, caused some heartburn there. What do you see as a timeline now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was wrong in the last at the beginning of the year. I thought they were going to get this done quickly because if you take a look at those issues, tax, energy, and immigration, those were Trump's three biggest issues that he talked about for 6 to 9 months. And I thought that really was going to be in the front. Then obviously, we have Doge and tariffs and everything else. And boy, it pushed everything back. I anticipated that this would be done by late spring or early summer. That's when I really thought that reconciliation would be completed. I think they'll be lucky to complete it by the August recess. And I say that for the very reasons I did. The numbers are so close. The House has their issues. The Senate has their issues. One's concerned about moderates. The other's concerned about conservatives. So they've got to bring their houses together, get their houses in order first. And I mean, they're negotiating behind the scenes right now, but someone has to make the first move. And then let's go back for just a minute on that budget that Schumer voted for after he said he would vote against it. Frankly, I was kind of impressed. That was a tough thing for him to do, but he knew he had to do it. Can you imagine with all these tariffs right now, if the government was shut down? If the government was shut down today and we had the turmoil that we have going on right now with all these tariffs, where the markets would be today and the pain that we'd all be feeling. Schumer did a tremendous job in leadership by voting for that budget. And I watched that because I watched Mitch McConnell make the same kind of votes. And that's what leadership does. And that gives me a little bit of hope as we move forward in this process, is that if Schumer can see the importance of the leadership of making sure that that gets done, hopefully, to me, that there's really is a chance that we can get something done and get something done meaningfully with some bipartisan support before the August recess.
Marco, are there so we've got the reconciliation bill that has to get done, and then we also have to get to the spending bills, if I understand the process correctly and remember it. We still have to get that done too. That has to be done by the end of October, or a continuing resolution to keep things going. Where do we see that playing out? And I'm curious how that relates to sort of the cutting in government spending that we're seeing. Do we see a much smaller spending bill that maybe zeroes out the landlines and the agencies as you were mentioning, or do we sort of have a bit of a spending free for all and then the administration having to rein it back in?
Yeah, thanks for that question and pointing that out. I think I'm not optimistic that the appropriations process for FY 2026 is completed in kind of a reasonable timeline here. I would expect more extensions. I think it's going to be very difficult for the House to pass any sort of spending bill. I think, as Senator Heller mentioned, the relationship between the two sides is fraught. There are certain Republican House members who will never vote for any government spending bill, especially an omnibus bill. So, a bill that includes the appropriations for all 12 bills. I would expect us to be kind of in extension land. And to be honest with you, I don't know really how that affects the funding fight. What I will say is that the OMB director has repeatedly said, and even in his confirmation hearings, stood by the idea that the executive can withhold funds that have been appropriated by Congress if they can accomplish the congressional directives by spending less. It's called the impoundment theory. I'm not sure if they're going to go down that road, but I'm not optimistic that a comprehensive spending package passes this year.
Hey, Ron,
Yeah.
Ron, listening to Marco, I'm pained to think that he's right, and I do think he's right. That it'll be very, very difficult to get a budget, and what they call regular order budget passed in this cycle for 2026. And I think we're just going to see extensions and extensions. And one of the reasons why is because, frankly, I don't think the general public cares that much about it. The issues that are in front of them right now on immigration and energy and taxes and all that, that has all the attention. Whether or not they pass a budget by the end of September is way down on that list.
Does it stay way down on the list as if the government spending, that sort of going back to the point earlier, the members of Congress, well, we're not getting, we don't know when your grants are going to be done. We don't know when X is going to happen. Does that start to put the midterms into a tricky situation?
100%. Yeah, and and that is a different question. If there aren't services out there, if Social Security recipients can't get their checks, if you got too many potholes in the roads, if these are the little things. And I've always said that stop signs, speed bumps, potholes, those are the things that people do pay attention to day to day. And if you start seeing that worsen, the Social Security, the veterans benefits, and all that, yeah, without a doubt, that can make a big difference. So we'll see what direction this is going to go here in the next 6 months. But yeah, there's a lot of pain out there, and there's a lot of mistakes that could put some real risk at the majority party at this point.
Marco, you mentioned the impoundment theory of the executive having the authority to withhold spending in certain circumstances. There's a lot of areas where this administration has been, if not pushing the bounds of sort of executive power, at least teeing up challenges to where those authorities lie, whether it's firing members of independent agencies where there's where there's not clear authority, where there's Supreme Court precedent, in fact, the other way. What's your sense of sort of the theory of how they're pushing the executive power, where they want to go with that, and how, Senator, I'm going to come to you after Marco answers, sort of where Congress thinks about some of that and how it fits together.
Sure. So I would say the overarching theory, and I think we've seen this in different presidencies in the past as well, is kind of the theory of the unitary executive. So there are no independent agencies. There's no constitutional category for an independent agency if you ask proponents of that theory. And I think the willingness is to try whatever the policy goal is to the maximum degree, and then walk it back if necessary to a point where the Supreme Court approves of it. You've seen also the president say that if the Supreme Court says that an action is unlawful, he'll follow that, but that district court judges should not have the ability to enjoin an administration action, particularly if it falls into the Article 2 authorities of the president. So those are, I would say, the overarching philosophy is try it and see what happens. And then, if you need to ratchet it back, you do, but only to the extent that is absolutely required to accomplish the policy goal.
Senator, what's your take?
Yeah, I think Marco just described the art of the deal, and that is to take it to a level and perhaps levels of absurdity, only to ratchet it back to get what you want. And I think Trump is very, very good at that. You're seeing that on tariffs right now. I think this goes all the way back to his first term when he formed the Supreme Court the way he wanted it. And I watched it firsthand and supported some of that process. So I think this goes way back to his first term, in that now he has a Supreme Court that is more willing to listen to what he has to say, and yet he's going to take it to levels that nobody would have expected, only to be able to ratchet back to get what he wants.
So there is a lot of this comes back to the art of the deal that we're seeing.
Yeah.
With the Supreme Court, and one of the executive orders on deregulation was basically, hey, executive agencies, here's a list of about 10 Supreme Court precedents from the past 5 to 10 years about unlawful agency action. Go and repeal all your regulations that would be subject to those decisions, and do it, by the way, with the expedited process where you don't have to go through notice and comment rulemaking, but they're unlawful actions, pull them back. How does that shake up settled expectations? How does that how does the business world react to that when suddenly a regulation that they were using or relying on or built a framework around disappears next week in a Federal Register notice?
That directed towards me?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. I give you all the hard ones first.
It depends on what side you're on. If you don't like the regulation, you're thrilled. If you're on the other side, then obviously it does cause some heartburn. But this is the world we live in right now. And the question is how long is he going to last? You got a president that's now talking about a third term, and the reason he's doing that is because he wants to be relevant, I believe, through the rest of this term. You get through the first 100 days. And especially when you get through the midterm election, all of a sudden, you're a president that's a lame duck. And I think what he's doing here is trying to make sure that he's relevant for the next 4 years so he can continue this agenda going forward as strong as he can. But no, if you're a business out there and these regulations are being dropped, or if you're an organization that's trying to protect the environment, so on and so forth, there's a lot of consternation out there going back and forth. And obviously the courts at the end of the day are going to have a play in all this, but it's got to be the highest court, because I think, as you said, Ron, they're going to ignore the district courts and some of the decisions that they make.
Marco, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll kind of give an example of this in the transportation space. So there are two California regulations, advanced clean trucks and advanced clean fleets. Advanced clean trucks received an EPA waiver that was subject to a Congressional Review Act inquiry, and the parliamentarian ruled that it was not subject to, it was not eligible because it was a waiver and not a regulation to the Congressional Review Act. So what's going to happen with that? I would think EPA is going to move on that immediately, and there probably will be some legal challenges. I think eventually the administration is likely to prevail on that front, but it speaks to what Senator Heller was saying, that the challenges for industry with some of these regulations is, there are going to be winners and losers, just like there are when a regulation is issued. The other side of it is the kind of 10-to-1 deregulatory agenda, 10 deregulatory actions for every one new regulation. That's not, I don't think, a strict math equation, but it's something to think about when you're having conversations with the administration, especially on framing. Even if you're asking for a regulatory action, it's helpful to frame those conversations in a way that comports with the deregulatory agenda.
Senator, where do the Congressional Review Act, I think, was an interesting point that Marco raised. That's a law that lets Congress basically veto a regulation. The president has to sign that, so it's very rare that it happens, except when there's a transfer in administrations. We're pretty much, I think, past the window where that comes into play. But what else does Congress do in terms of the deregulatory agenda? How can it help? What can it think about doing in this space?
Well, first of all, you have a makeup of Congress right now that is in support, heavy support of deregulation, and you're hearing the rhetoric of the overreach and the size of government, so on and so forth. So I think for the most part, they're going to kind of sit on their hands, watch this process go through. I think that they'll have hearings. The minority party may push hearings on some of this deregulation, but I'll tell you right now, we're at a point right now, at least for the next 18 months or 20 months, that they're not upset. I think they're really watching this process very, very closely. Most of them support deregulation and believe that that's part of the process for a stronger economy. So there's not going to be a lot of move on it, a lot of action on it. I don't think on the Hill, they're going to let the president do what he wants to do.
Sort of very big picture question for you, Senator. I think when you look at sort of the Supreme Court decisions on regulation, sort of overturning Chevron, some of the major questions, doctrine cases, there seems to be a sense of each of the political branches should be doing their job. Congress should be passing the laws. The executive should execute those laws, not reinterpret or completely change those laws. That's Congress's job. Congress is, as you've said a couple of times, very closely split. It's very hard to get anything done. How do we move forward into a world where Congress passes the laws and the executive implements the laws and sort of gets back? Because right now it seems like we've got an administration that's very much, let's get the executive back to where it was supposed to be, in terms of unitary executive, not independent agencies. The president gets to make the policy, but Congress doesn't seem capable of getting back to its spot. How does that play out?
Well, first of all, I think that's the $100,000 question that you just asked right now. I mean, I don't know how you're a government teacher in high school today. How are you teaching your government class these three branches of government and what they're supposed to do, what their responsibilities are? Because most of that's been thrown out the window in the last 6 months. So it's going to take people standing up. Frankly, it's going to take lawmakers that can see through this, that recognize the damage that is occurring and potentially the damage that could occur. Everybody needs to realize that if it's good for you today, you're going to be on the other side potentially down the road. Why are you making these changes that the other side can do exactly the same thing? And it would be very, very painful. The Republicans complained for years about some of the missteps and some of the overreaching of those on the other side. And here we are doing the exact same thing, and it's going to come back to bite you. And that's where you need lawmakers that realize and recognizing that you're not always going to be in the majority. You're not always going to control three houses. Or both houses. You're not always going to be in the majority. Don't put rules and regulations in place that are going to come back to haunt you, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, or 10 years from now. That is where these lawmakers have to come to their senses and recognize that there's a reason we have a rule of law. There's a reason we have the Constitution. The reason we follow them is so that one side doesn't take advantage of the other. And right now, that's exactly what's going on.
Marco, what's your view?
Yeah, I would just say, I think the trend of the growth of the executive is a trend that's been going on for a long time. I think to the senator's point, the only thing, the president has no incentive to give away any power, right? So there's supposed to be competition between the three branches. In the last, we'll say 25 years, there really hasn't been an appetite for the Article 1 branch to kind of take some of that back. So it will be interesting to see if that happens.
With respect to the Article 3 branch, the courts, I think you've both made the point that there are the lower federal courts some of them have gotten very aggressive in how they've treated the president's decisions, trying to imposing nationwide temporary restraining orders out of one district court. The president obviously taking a different view and looking to the Supreme Court to make those decisions. What do we think in terms of sort of everyone taking a calmer view? Some of the district courts, when I look at some of the decisions, I see a challenge to an executive order that doesn't actually do anything. It just tells the agencies to eventually do something, and yet there's injunctions issued out of those. How do we get past that? How does the administration sort of message that they're following the law, but they're not beholden to one district court judge somewhere? Senator,
I was going to let Marco take a swing at that one.
Sure. So I would again just point back to there's going to be tension here between the administration and particularly the district courts. Obviously, there's a lot of venue shopping going around with parties that want to prevent certain executive orders from taking place. But I think it's just going to result in the caseload of the Supreme Court going up, if I had to predict. But not too much more to say on that.
Okay. So we're almost at time. I'm going to give each one of you sort of what do we look for in the next 100 days? What do you tell your clients to be prepared for? What do we think about? What do we need to do? Senator?
Well, again, Ron, thank you for putting this on. I want to thank everybody who's participated and joined us, and those that sent in questions. Makes a big difference in these seminars, and I'm thrilled to be able to participate and add some substance to it. But to my clients and for those I'm talking to, I tell them every single day it's about relationships. The ability to have conversations with your lawmakers and have representation that does have good relationships with these lawmakers at the end of the day in all this chaos, that is what's going to make the difference. And that's what I do. That's my job, is to be out there every single day talking to the decision makers and trying to figure out, get a feel for it and see how it's changing on a daily basis. But, there are good things that are going to happen. I'll just end on that. I don't want everything to sound doom and gloom. Good things are going to happen. In fact, last week, because of the fires in Southern California in January, they're starting to rev up some of these issues on how to fight wildfires. I mean, there are some bipartisan issues out there that I keep my eye on and watch them, and can tell that if you find the right topic, the right issue, you can bring both sides together. But again, the key is relationships, knowing the leadership, knowing the White House, people that are in there that can have these conversations. That's what representation is all about, and that's what I do. So anyway, Ron, again, thank you. Thanks for those who participated in this seminar. It's great to be with you today.
Great. Thanks, Senator. Marco, what are your parting words of wisdom?
I echo everything that the senator said. The only quick thing I'll add is also it's important to have representation that understands the administration, because sometimes you may need a translator to kind of interpret some of this stuff. And again, that is what we do here. But really appreciate all the attendees and the participation here. And thanks to Ron and the senator especially for joining.
Well, thank you both for joining me today to have this conversation. It was hopefully very enlightening for everybody in the audience. I know it was fascinating for me to get to talk to these two experts in this area. For everybody who joined for CLE credit, a reminder that the code word is first 100 days 2025. That's the word first, 100, the number, days 2025, all one word that you'll submit. There's a link that has been in the chat for how to get the CLE credit approved. So Senator, thank you very much. Marco, thank you very much. Hope everyone has enjoyed both this and also the other 18 or so sessions we did on the first 100 days of the new administration. This is going to be our last of the transition, but we'll have plenty more updates in webinars along the way for helping to navigate this fascinating policy environment. So thanks, everybody.